So I see that you've made it. I bet you have a lot of questions for me, huh? Or are they for Nightmare? They call me the Swamp Dweller. Don't be afraid. We prepared something special. Just for you. All you have to do is sit back and watch. And welcome to NightmareExpo weekend.
About a decade ago, a video was uploaded to YouTube called Tea Time. It's a short film that was created on a single Super 8 reel by a director that was participating in a film festival out of Los Angeles called Attack of the 50-Foot Reels. I briefly touched on it back during my Top 5 Strange and Unnerving YouTube videos upload back in May, and I wanted to dive a little deeper into the story and give my explanation and stance on the film. To clear the air, yes, I know this is a film, yes, I know it was for a contest, and yes, I know it's old. This, however, doesn't make it any less interesting or enjoyable to watch. With this being said, let's dive in. The premise begins rather simply. Tea Time opens with a shot of an elderly woman as she prepares to make a cup of tea. The first 10 seconds themselves are vital here as we're presented with cheerful, calming music and this lady going about what seems like an ordinary day. Questions only begin to arise when she lays down 2 teacups, implying that there will either be 2 people involved in this scene or simply that she's waiting on a guest. Nothing is really that out of the ordinary until we're presented with a shot of her face. When we see it, it seems strangely distraught. This begins our curiosity regarding what exactly is going on here. Why does she seem like she's about to break down while concurrently forcing a smile upon her face? With these questions in mind, we press on. The next shot displays a bag of pet food and then a food bowl, and shortly after this we're then presented with more major questions. Where is this pet, and why is the bowl so overfilled? It truly begins to set us off on the foot that something is actually wrong here, and we're determined to find out precisely what that problem actually is. The lady then proceeds to put the bag of pet food away and heads to the restroom with a strange and obviously forced smile on her face. The background music begins to intensify and become increasingly more distorted and blended at this point as well. Upon looking at her own reflection, her demeanor instantly takes a plunge as her facial expression goes from forced happiness to complete confusion and shock. It's almost as if she's looking at a monster, unaware that it's actually herself. We're then presented with a shot of her as she makes a 180-degree pivot to turn around, and finally, at this point, we're presented with the climax of the film. There is a dead, bloodied man in her bathtub, and he appears to have been stabbed multiple times. Side note here is that the music seems to reach its maximum intensity at this point, and I'll dive into my theory on this later. Our lady then proceeds back to the kitchen as cued by the teapot whistling, and she then sits at the table, sipping away as she seems confused and filled with regret. Shortly after, we can see the bloodied man, who we can presume is her husband, approaching the table on all fours before crawling up onto the chair and reaching out to grab her. Following this, she then gets up, goes to grab a hacksaw from beneath the sink, and walks off screen as the camera focuses on and zooms into a dead cat in a trash bag before ending. Now, from beginning to end, the film appears to present us with more questions than answers. Let's begin with the most prominent one. Who the hell actually is that deceased bloodied up man in her bathtub, and why was he stabbed? This question is central to the entire video since it allows us to form opinions and theories based around it. Diving into this video isn't a linear process, but rather an expansive one. So, the man was stabbed, but by who? We never actually witnessed the stabbing happening, and so we have no definitive proof of who actually committed the murder. The answers, however, come in her behavior before and after the big reveal. So, we observe her behavior at the beginning of the film. Everything seems happy-go-lucky and innocent. However, her facial expression is vital since it shows us that she knows something major occurred and has some recollection of it happening. Her remorseful behavior at the beginning supports evidence that she was the one who stabbed her husband. But why? Jumping to the second half of the video, we notice a prominent lack of empathy coming from her after re-encountering her dead husband in the bathtub. When in the restroom, she displays some signs of remorse. However, afterwards, she seems to attempt to go back to her normal daily life before being followed by him to the table. This is significant for one major theory that I formed in regards to the plot. This theory is that she has dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's disease. Now, hear me out on this. Alzheimer's primarily affects people over age 65, and our main focus is this lady. She's in the opening scene, and we follow her throughout the entire film. She appears to be in her 60s or so, and truly seems to be initially conflicted. Her forced smile might represent her thinking that everything is normal at that point in time. However, in the back of her mind, she knows that something is wrong and that she did something very bad. Jumping forward to the restroom scene, she looks in the mirror and we can notice one major detail. She doesn't seem to recognize who she's looking at. Once she takes a look at her dead husband, she appears to display some regret before walking off once more and resuming with her tea. We may notice, however, that her cue was the teapot's whistle, and if that hadn't happened, the plot may very well have gone differently with her staying focused on him much longer than she did. Dementia patients struggle terribly with short and long-term memory, and unfortunately over time their memory degrades further and further. With the cue of the teapot, she appears to have completely forgotten what she was doing, which was trying to figure out what in the hell happened to her husband. Some Alzheimer's patients also tend to exhibit one major characteristic, that being periodic aggression. Alzheimer's aggression is a form of behavior that results from consistent frustration with oneself and can happen randomly in some patients. I believe that this is what happened to her here. However, her situation fell out of control and spiraled downhill extremely fast. Let's jump over to the cat in the closing scene real quick. The very last shot of the video shows a dead cat in a trash bag, and it seems like it's been in there for quite some time. This is supported by the fact that the cat's food bowl appears days overfilled. She may have possibly lashed out one day, killing the cat in the process. The fact that the cat is in a trash bag versus the husband that's bloodied in the bathtub could signify that this was done secretly and she attempted to hide the cat's body under the sink, presumably from her husband. He likely then noticed that the cat was missing and was probably wondering where the hell it is. After bugging her about it for some time, she may have lashed out at him, and while he tried to contain the situation, she fatally stabbed him. One side note that I want to make here is the idea that she possibly had lost all her memory of her husband up to this point in her life as well, and so to herself she didn't know who she was lashing out at and stabbing. For all she knew at this point, he could have been an intruder to her. Anyway, after this, she moved his body to the bathtub and forgot what she was doing, so she proceeded to live her life through her normal routine, making a nice cup of tea for herself and her husband whom she had forgotten that she just killed. This allows us to theorize the entire plot behind Tea Time, answering most of our major questions. Another quick point that I want to make here surrounds the husband as he bloodily approaches the table. This ultimately could signify the idea that he's haunting her and trying to get back at her for killing him. This appears to get to her head, and so she proceeds to grab the hacksaw from under the sink to cut him up and get rid of the body in a possible attempt to get rid of her demons. One last point that I want to make here is the synchronization of the music with the progression of the film. As I said before, it begins cheerfully. The further we progress into the revelation of the story, the more distorted and complex the music actually becomes. I stated this in my top 5 video, and I'll state it now. I believe that the music is representative of her mental state as she slowly deteriorates into remorse and madness. However, I'd like to add one small point to this. The music becomes more ominous as well towards the end as the husband approaches her at the table, and this could ultimately represent him getting into her head as she comes to terms with the fact that she committed the worst act that a human could ever make: cold-blooded murder. The thing is, she didn't truly know it until later. Tea Time is phenomenal. It's an expansive story that builds and builds and leaves us not only compelled, but completely confused as to what exactly is happening and how she got to this point in her life. This was my personal theory as to what's happening here, and I absolutely recommend that you go over, watch the short film, and form your own opinions as to what's going on. I hope you all enjoyed my explanation of Tea Time, and as always, if you have any suggestions of content to cover, please keep throwing them my way, as I'm always looking for more. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. I love you all, and once again, good night.
See? Now that wasn't so bad, was it? We'll be back for you tomorrow, so see you then.